Washington Post reporting that the month of March has been especially cruel to Elon Musk, with a record number of Tesla owners trading in their cars. Nobody wants to be seen driving a Tesla because it makes you look like a right-wing D-bag. Trump telling reporters that recent attacks on Tesla dealerships, charging stations, and Tesla automobiles, quote, are worse than anything we saw on January 6. Trump said, on January 6, nobody was killed other than a very beautiful young woman, Ashley Babbitt. Well, nobody is being killed by these Tesla attacks. I mean, they're wrong, but nobody's getting killed by them. And people were killed on January 6. 140 police officers on January 6 were sent to the hospital with head trauma, cracked ribs, smashed spinal discs, and chemical burns. One officer died the next day. Within weeks, 4 committed suicide. On Thursday, the Department of Justice charged 3 people with domestic terrorism for vandalizing Tesla cars and dealerships. On Friday, Trump threatened to ship any American citizens who vandalize Teslas to El Salvador's prison complex. Trump said, quote, I look forward to watching the sick terrorist thugs get 20-year jail sentences for what they are doing to Elon Musk and Tesla. Perhaps they could serve those terms in the prisons of El Salvador, which have become so recently famous for such lovely conditions. He said, ironically, such lovely conditions. He knows exactly how the migrants he sent to El Salvador are being treated in those prisons. He celebrates it. He celebrates it. Since 2022, El Salvador's president has locked up 84,000 people arbitrarily based on tattoos, accusing them of being gang members. The prisons have a 300% occupancy rate, according to Amnesty International. 3 times as many prisoners in El Salvador are behind bars than they are equipped to handle. Per capita, El Salvador has the highest incarceration rate in the world. They have surpassed our own. So much for American exceptionalism. And this is where we're sending the migrants. Amnesty International says in the past 2 years, 300 prisoners have been tortured to death in El Salvador that we know of. They don't allow inspections. 1,000 children being held in these prisons in the same cells with adults. Look at this. Look at this. Look how overcrowded these prisons are. Trump celebrating the prison conditions, using these prison conditions as a cudgel, warning American citizens, if you're caught vandalizing a Tesla, this is where you could end up. During Marco Rubio's visit to El Salvador in early February, El Salvador's president offered to take in U.S. citizens as prisoners, not just migrants, U.S. citizens. When asked about this, Trump said he didn't know if it was legal, but thought it would be a great idea. The Washington Post reporting the Department of Homeland Security just closed 3 of its divisions that investigate violations of human rights made by immigration officials. The Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, and the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman no longer exist. There is nobody now at the Department of Homeland Security making sure ICE is obeying our laws. The Department of Homeland Security spokesperson, Tricia McLaughlin, called civil rights protections, quote, roadblocks to enforcement, unquote. We've heard this from fascists since the early 1920s. If only the police could do their jobs without civil libertarians looking over their shoulders. Because we all know everyone who works for ICE is a good person and not a sadist. The U.S. Constitution has 10 bills of rights. 8 of the 10 govern how police, how law enforcement treat citizens. Go read the Bill of Rights. Our founding fathers, even the slaveholders, especially the slaveholders, knew how dangerous people paid to enforce the law, how dangerous they can be. Noor Abdallah is an American citizen. On Sunday, she spoke out against the arrest of her pro-Palestinian activist husband, Mahmoud Khalil, who is being held in a Louisiana ICE detention facility. Khalil was one of the leaders of the pro-Palestinian student protests at Columbia University last spring. No criminal record. He's married to an American citizen, and he's being charged with no crime. He's sitting in a detention center in Louisiana, rounded up early this month, accused of being a threat to President Trump's foreign policy. The McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, has never been tested in our courts until now. According to Trump, this law gives Secretary of State Marco Rubio the authority to deport any immigrant Rubio deems a threat to President Trump's foreign policy. In other words, if the Secretary of State doesn't approve of your ideology, if the Secretary of State doesn't approve of what you think, you can be subject to deportation. Noor Abdallah, Mahmoud Khalil's wife, 8 months pregnant. They live in New York City, so he should be held in the detention center in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right over the Hudson River, not 1,500 miles away in Louisiana. But this is all about cruelty, about sadism. She told CBS News Sunday, quote, "It's so simple. He just doesn't want his people to be murdered. He doesn't want to see little kids losing limbs," unquote. Meanwhile, the death toll in Gaza is now 50,000. 50,000 Palestinians have died in Gaza since October 7th, 2023. ABC News reporting Trump has stopped funding a $200 million program offering legal advice to unaccompanied minors who've arrived at the border. Kristi Noem, the head of Department of Homeland Security, recently said children should be held accountable for entering our country without documents because, she said, they had a choice in the matter. It's been little more than 1 week since Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act to round up migrants and ship them to prisons in El Salvador. Now, there are two pieces of law Trump is using to justify these actions. In order to chill speech, he is using the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Trump believes that law gives our Secretary of State authority to forcibly detain and deport any immigrant whose politics the Secretary of State deems a threat. The law was passed in 1952 to keep communists from coming into America. Now it's being used to detain and deport pro-Palestinian protesters, even though they have the proper documentation, even though they're in this country legally. In order to deport migrants and keep them permanently in prison down in El Salvador, the president last Saturday, 2 Saturdays ago, signed an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act, which gives the president wartime powers to detain anyone, including American citizens, when our country is at war. Roosevelt used the Enemy Aliens Act to put Japanese citizens in concentration camps during World War II. Trump, 2 Saturdays ago, declared through executive order that America is at war because we are being invaded by immigrants, and therefore migrants, especially the ones who belong to gangs, are terrorist soldiers who must be arrested and deported to El Salvador with zero due process. The problem with all of this is everyone knows we're not at war. The flow of migrants into this country is at a 5-year low. His declaration of war, saying we're at war, you need an act of Congress to say we're at war, or a war authorization. You just can't declare we're at war to justify sending migrants to El Salvador. It's not going to hold up in court. But that doesn't matter. Trump has always been about saying what he can get away with. On Friday, Trump blamed Secretary of State Marco Rubio for nearly 300 migrants getting flown to El Salvador in defiance, 2 Saturdays ago, in defiance of a judge's order blocking the flights. Trump, beginning to realize this isn't going to hold up in court, now insisting, I never signed an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act. He's blaming Marco Rubio, and he's confusing the 2 laws he's using to justify this persecution of people of color, because that's what this really is about. It's punishing Muslims, dark-skinned Muslims with strange-sounding names, and people from El Salvador, people from Central America, people from Venezuela. Trump's a little confused. Rubio, and only Rubio, is responsible for enforcing the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. Rubio is not responsible for enforcing the Alien Enemies Act. The Alien Enemies Act has nothing to do with Rubio. The Alien Enemies Act, that's what Donald Trump invoked in order to tell the Department of Homeland Security to grab some migrants, call them gang members, and put them on a flight to El Salvador. And this is going to be a problem for Trump. Everything about it is illegal. We're not at war. There's no proof that these migrants are gang members, not even criminals. So he's trying to blame Rubio, but Rubio has nothing to do with this. Rubio is responsible for enforcing the McCarran-Walter Act, formerly known as the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952. Rubio is chilling speech by detaining pro-Palestinian immigrants whose politics Trump disagrees with. Trump is a stupid POS who can't possibly keep track of any of this. So while insisting it's Rubio who's behind the deportations of the alleged gang members, Trump was asked on Friday, Mr. President, do you think that you have the authority, the power to round up people, deport them, and you're under no obligation to a court to show the evidence against them? This would be the Enemy Aliens Act. And Trump said, that's what the law says, and that's what our country needs. That's the Enemy Aliens Act, which says you have to be at war. And we're not. Which is why a judge blocked those flights to El Salvador 2 Saturdays ago, and Trump is trying to blame Marco Rubio. Trump insists the nearly 300 migrants sent to El Salvador were gang members and therefore terrorists. Trump was asked, well, if they're terrorists, why aren't they being shot instead of arrested? He had no answer. He assured reporters that before being shipped off, there was a strong vetting process of these migrants. He was assured that they are all gang members. Border czar Tom Homan telling ABC News on Sunday every migrant flown to El Salvador 2 Saturdays ago was a gang member. Homan said, how do I know this? Because ICE told me they were gang members. Really? Apparently he didn't talk to Robert Sena, acting ICE field director in Texas, who told the judge in this case on Friday, quote, many of the 261 migrants deported didn't have criminal records. No proof that they're gang members. They've been called criminals. Now we're being told many of them not criminals. Judge James E. Boasberg blocked those flights 2 Saturdays ago, but they took off anyway. During Friday's hearing, Judge Boasberg demanded to know, how did that happen? Why were my orders defied? And he said, I doubt the Alien Enemies Act can be used to justify these deportations. Judge Boasberg said Friday, quote, the government is not being terribly cooperative at this point, but I will get to the bottom of whether they violated my order and who was responsible, unquote. This is why they're introducing articles of impeachment to get rid of Judge Boasberg. The Trump administration was ordered to inform Judge Boasberg by Tuesday whether they plan to invoke state secrets privilege, which means they would disobey officially his orders and take this to an appeals court, claiming the transportation of these migrants was done under wartime, and by telling the judge why we did it and showing him timelines, it would jeopardize national security. Border czar Tom Homan telling ABC News on Sunday he will obey this judge's order, even though he spent all of last week saying, I don't care what that judge says, there will be more migrants shipped to El Salvador.